Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we drift toward a vast coastline where the sea breathes in slow, steady tides and where city lights glow like lanterns set out along a river's curve. You don't need to hold on to dates or names. Let them pass like boats in mist, carrying only the feeling of motion, the sense that a place can change patiently over many seasons. Picture China in the late 20th century, waking from a long, strict kind of stillness. In 1978, a new direction began to form, not as one dramatic moment, but as a gradual loosening. Farmers were allowed to keep more of what they produced, and small experiments in markets appeared, first in the countryside, then in towns, then along the edge of the sea. Economists later called it reform and opening, but it felt, to ordinary people, like doors that had been closed for years beginning to unstick. In a few coastal spots, special economic zones were created, places where foreign investment and export manufacturing could grow with fewer constraints. One of them, Shenzhen, was once a fishing community near Hong Kong, and over a few decades it became a city of towers, factories, and software parks. It's the kind of transformation that sounds impossible until you remember how steady repetition works. One road, one workshop, one apartment block, and then another. And under all of it was something quiet and practical. The decision to experiment. Try one policy in one place, watch what happens, adjust, and try again. It was not a clean line, and it was not the same everywhere. Some regions moved quickly, others slowly, and many people simply did what people do. They adapted, they learned, they took cautious chances, and they kept going. As you settle deeper into bed, imagine the country as a long map made of rivers and mountains and plains, and imagine, too, the hum of millions of ordinary choices. To move, to build, to learn, to try something slightly new. The world feels large, but tonight we watch it from a distance, with the gentleness of night around us. At the edge of the map, the ports begin to matter. A coastline is not just scenery. It is an interface, a place where one economy can touch another. In those years, China began to sell more to the world and to buy more from it too. Machines, inputs, know-how, and new expectations about quality and speed. Containers moved like quiet punctuation across oceans, and the rhythm of trade started to sync with the rhythm of factory shifts. None of this happens in a single morning. It happens the way sleep comes. Gradually, through small changes you barely notice until you realize you've crossed into a different state. Tonight, we'll follow that gradual crossing decade by decade, letting the story stay calm, even when the scale is immense. In the early years of this rise, much of the change began with food. When families had stronger incentives to harvest well, agricultural output improved, and the worry of shortage eased in many regions. That meant something subtle but powerful. People could think beyond the next meal. Small rural enterprises began to appear, sometimes organized through villages, sometimes through local governments, producing simple goods, repairing tools, sewing garments. mixing cement. These township and village enterprises became a bridge between a tightly planned economy and a more market-shaped way of producing and selling. At night, it's comforting to picture work as a gentle rhythm. A hand measures grain, another stitches fabric, another writes numbers in a ledger. The details are ordinary, but their scale is extraordinary. When growth is sustained for years, even small improvements stack into something large, the way small streams quietly deepen a riverbed. Meanwhile, along the coast, container ports expanded. A container is a quiet invention, a metal box with standard dimensions that can move from ship to train to truck without being unpacked. When trade grows, containers become the physical punctuation marks of globalization, and China's shoreline filled with cranes that swung slowly above stacks of steel rectangles. In the 1980s and 1990s, many foreign companies began to shift parts of their manufacturing to China, drawn by labor availability, improving infrastructure, and policies designed to encourage exports. This was not a single wave, but many overlapping ones. Textiles and toys, then electronics assembly, then more complex components. Supply chains became like long braided ropes, with one strand in a workshop inland, another in a port city, another in a store across the ocean. And because the world wanted affordable goods, the factories kept humming. Orders arrived, schedules tightened, and systems learned to deliver at scale. You can let that image soften now. Cranes moving like patient birds, ships waiting in orderly lines, and the sense of a planet learning to coordinate itself through trade one shipment at a time. Somewhere behind the noise of commerce, there is also a quiet human theme: migration. When wages differ between village and city, people move. When opportunity concentrates, people follow it. And so the next chapter begins, not with machines, but with footsteps. In the distance, you can almost hear a new sound entering the night. The soft clatter of suitcases on station floors, the murmur of people waiting for buses, the quiet resolve of starting over in a new city. As the decades moved on, the story became less about a few coastal districts and more about a whole nation on the move. China's population was already large, but the pattern of where people lived began to shift. Urbanization accelerated. Families left villages for cities, looking for factory jobs, construction work, service roles, and new kinds of education. In practical terms, urbanization means pipes and wires and roads, clean water systems, power stations, sewage treatment, apartment towers, buses, and subways. It's not only a social transformation, but an engineering one. If you've ever watched a city grow, you know the sound it makes. Not a single noise, but layers. Drilling, mixing concrete, the steady clack of rebar, the low rumble of trucks. Over time, those sounds become a kind of background music, and then slowly they fade into the quieter hum of daily life. Economic growth for long stretches was powered by investment and exports. Factories produced goods for global markets, and profits were reinvested into more factories, more housing, more infrastructure. This created feedback loops. Jobs drew migrants, migrants drew housing, housing drew steel and cement, and steel and cement drew more energy and transport capacity. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization after many years of negotiation. Membership signaled deeper integration into global trade rules, and it accelerated the scale of exports and investment flows. For some countries, this shift felt like a sudden gust of wind. For China, it was another step in an already moving current. Tonight, you don't have to judge any of it. Just notice the shape of it. A long, steady rise built from systems, incentives, and the quiet persistence of daily work. And as you listen, let the city sound soften, as if they are happening far away, beyond the walls of your room. And inside China, specialization spread too. Some cities became known for electronics, others for textiles, others for appliances, machinery, or automotive parts. Industrial clusters formed like constellations, each bright point supported by smaller suppliers around it, a screw factory near a motor factory near a packaging plant, each one small, together, persistent. Migration became one of the largest human movements in modern history. People traveled from inland provinces to coastal hubs, from farms to construction sites, from small workshops to assembly lines. Some returned home later with savings, building new houses and funding education. Others stayed, turning temporary work into permanent city life. Picture it gently, like a slow tide. People arriving, finding footing, learning new routines. The world outside keeps moving, but you can remain still and warm, letting the tide exist only as a quiet image. With growth came a vast building of physical networks, the bones of a modern economy. Highways stretched across provinces, bridges leapt over rivers, power grids expanded, linking distant generation to dense cities. Ports deepened and widened, airports multiplied. And then, in the 2000s and 2010s, a particularly striking network unfolded: high-speed rail. There is something soothing about imagining rails at night. Two lines of steel running into darkness, reflecting faint light, promising direction. China's high-speed rail network became the longest in the world, with tens of thousands of kilometers of track, connecting megacities and smaller hubs, turning overnight journeys into a few calm hours. Trains became moving rooms of quiet, soft lighting, a steady glide, the gentle blur of fields and buildings beyond the window. Infrastructure is often described with big numbers, but its true meaning is intimate. It's a person visiting family more easily. It's fresh produce arriving faster. It's a hospital reachable in time. It's a worker able to live in one place and earn in another. Systems like rail and power and water are the unseen kindnesses of a functioning society, even when they are imperfect. China's rise also relied on education and skills. Universities expanded, technical training grew, millions learned new crafts, from machining to accounting to software. And as incomes rose, consumer markets expanded too. Bicycles to motorbikes to cars, simple phones to smartphones, small shops to malls. Tonight, imagine a train passing through a darkened station, doors opening with a quiet sigh. Imagine the platform lights, the low murmur of voices, the feeling of motion without urgency. A country is rising outside the window, but inside the cabin, everything is calm. By the mid-2020s, China's high-speed rail mileage had passed the 50,000-kilometer mark, a web of fast lines that, in some places, makes distance feel like a softer thing. This did not appear by accident. Long-term railway plans were revised and expanded, and construction crews repeated the same patient work across mountains, rivers, and plains. Tunneling, bridging, laying ballast, setting track, testing signals, and then, finally, letting the first train glide through. And as networks multiply, life becomes less about isolation and more about links. A student can study far from home and return easily for holidays. A small factory can sell to a larger market. A rural town can be a stop on a fast line, stitched into the broader fabric. Let those stitches be gentle. Let them be threads, not chains. And let your own mind loosen as you imagine the train's steady hum, the simplest lullaby of motion. There is a well-known statistic that helps anchor the human scale of this transformation. Over the past several decades, China reduced extreme poverty by an amount so large that it reshaped global poverty numbers, with hundreds of millions moving above the most severe thresholds. Behind any figure like that are countless small changes: steadier wages, better roads, more schooling, improved health access, and the compounding effect of growth over time. But numbers can feel sharp at night, so we'll hold them softly. Think of poverty reduction as a gradual brightening of a room. At first, a single lamp, then another, then the whole space becoming easier to navigate. It is not a perfect story, and it does not erase hardship, but it does show what sustained development can do when combined with policy focus and massive social effort. China's development model shifted over time. Early growth leaned heavily on low-cost manufacturing and exports. Later, it added more domestic consumption, services, and higher-value industries. Cities grew not just as factory centers, but as hubs for finance, design, logistics, education, and technology. Technology, in particular, began to weave itself into everyday life. Mobile payments became common. Messaging apps replaced many forms of paperwork. E-commerce connected rural producers with urban buyers. In some ways, consumer internet adoption leapfrogged older patterns, moving quickly into a world where the phone was a wallet, a ticket, a storefront, and a map. Tonight, imagine the glow of a phone screen not as something stimulating, but as a tiny lantern, a quiet tool that, in the right context, can make life smoother, a train ticket purchased in seconds, a delivery scheduled, a family member reached across distance. And then let that lantern dim as your own room grows quieter and you return to the slow rhythm of breath. The improvements were uneven, of course. Some regions surged ahead, others caught up more slowly, and inequality rose in many periods. Yet the overall direction for many households was upward. Safer drinking water, sturdier housing, more reliable electricity, and a widening circle of choice. Development can be measured in GDP, but it is also measured in small conveniences. A paved road where there was mud, a clinic where there was none, a classroom with new books, a refrigerator that keeps food fresh through the heat. And because China is so large, shifts there ripple outward through trade, commodities, and the quiet pricing of everyday goods. Still, for you tonight, it can stay intimate. Just one room, gently brightening lamp by lamp until everything feels a little easier. Now let the room go dim again, not with loss, but with rest. Let the story keep breathing on its own while you drift toward sleep. The room has dimmed again, and the story continues at a distance, like waves you can hear but don't need to follow. In the early 2000s, China's connection to global trade became more formal and more predictable, and in 2001, it joined the World Trade Organization, agreeing to a shared set of rules that made cross-border business feel less like a gamble and more like a routine. Routine is soothing, especially at night, because routine turns effort into habit, and habit into something that can run quietly without demanding constant attention. Factories that had been growing along the coast expanded further, and more foreign companies began to place parts of their supply chains there, drawn by large workforces, improving logistics, and a government determined to build the roads, ports, and power needed for scale. You can picture a warehouse lit in soft fluorescent glow, pallets stacked neatly, labels printed, forklifts moving with unhurried precision, and beyond the doors, a line of trucks waiting patiently for their turn. Container shipping, already transforming world commerce, became even more central because a standardized metal box can move from ship to rail to truck with less unpacking, less breakage, and less delay, and those small savings add up when you repeat them millions of times. As exports rose, so did the quiet confidence of interdependence, the sense that many households far away would wake to objects made in a city they could not locate on a map, while in that city, workers would wake to a job shaped by demand on the other side of an ocean. Inside China, the gains were uneven because coastal regions often grew faster than inland areas, but the overall direction for many families was a widening of options, a little more income, a little more mobility, and a clearer path to schooling, housing, and services. There were also new vulnerabilities, because when growth leans on global demand, it becomes sensitive to global slowdowns. Yet the system kept learning, adjusting production, shifting product mixes, and expanding domestic markets when export cycles softened. Tonight, you do not need to hold any of this as argument or analysis, only as a gentle picture of coordination, millions of small actions aligning through contracts, schedules, and shipping timetables, like an enormous orchestra that plays softly even when you are not listening. Let the ports remain far away, cranes moving slowly against the dark, ship lights blinking like distant stars, and the whole world feeling connected, steady, and quiet. And as you settle deeper into the pillow, imagine paperwork stamped, gates opening, and a train horn fading into night, all without urgency. From those distant harbors, the story turns inland toward the quiet architecture that makes growth possible. Infrastructure is rarely glamorous, yet it is the steady skeleton beneath modern life. And over these decades, China built and upgraded vast networks of highways, railways, ports, airports, and power lines, reducing the time and uncertainty between where things are made and where they are needed. A road is a simple thing, but when it is paved, widened, maintained, and connected, it becomes a promise that a truck can arrive on schedule, that food can travel without spoiling, that a hospital can be reached, that a factory can rely on parts arriving before the shift begins. Logistics is the art of calm coordination, and you can feel its comfort in the idea that the same routes are traveled again and again until movement becomes predictable, almost sleepy, like a lullaby made of timetables. Railways played a special role, first moving heavy freight across long distances, then increasingly carrying people, and in the 2000s and 2010s, a high-speed rail system expanded quickly, stitching major cities together with smooth, gliding journeys. There is a particular quiet to a fast train at night, because speed does not have to feel frantic, and inside the carriage everything can be gentle, with soft lighting, steady air, and a rhythm of wheels that becomes a kind of breathing. You might imagine a traveler leaning against the window, watching dark fields slide by, then a small town, then the faint reflection of their own face in the glass, as if the train is carrying not only bodies, but thoughts. High-speed rail changes the feel of a country by shrinking distance, turning what used to be an overnight trip into a few calm hours, and by making it easier for regions to share labor, talent, and markets without needing everyone to live in the same place. Around stations, new neighborhoods often grew because people follow connection, and connection invites shops, offices, schools, and apartments, each one adding a new layer of daily life to the map. Yet the most soothing part of infrastructure is how quickly it becomes invisible, because once the bridge is built and the timetable is reliable, you stop thinking about it and you simply arrive, as if distance had never been a problem at all. Tonight, let that be the feeling you borrow for yourself, the sense that you are arriving slowly into rest, with no decisions left to make, while somewhere far away a train glides through darkness, and the world keeps its steady pace. Outside your room, networks keep humming, but here, the only journey that matters is the small one from wakefulness into sleep. As the rails and roads multiplied, another system worked quietly beneath them, giving every light its glow and every machine its turning. For much of this rise, China's electricity was powered heavily by coal, abundant at home and able to deliver large amounts of energy quickly. And for years, the priority was simple reliability, keeping factories running, homes heated, and cities lit as millions moved into urban life. At night, you can imagine the grid like a hidden river, flowing through wires and substations, branching into neighborhoods, climbing apartment towers, and ending in small, ordinary moments. A kettle warming, a desk lamp shining, an elevator moving with a soft hum. But the costs of rapid industrialization accumulated, especially in air pollution and carbon emissions. And over time, the country began to invest more in cleaner sources, expanding wind and solar generation, building long transmission lines, improving efficiency, and tightening environmental standards in many places. Energy transitions are never a single switch because old plants remain while new ones grow. And the overlap can feel messy in the daylight, yet from a distance it resembles a gradual change in tone, a deep bass note fading as a lighter harmony becomes stronger. China also became a major producer of renewable energy equipment, especially solar panels. And this mattered not only for its own grid, but for global costs, because when manufacturing scale increases, prices often fall and adoption becomes easier elsewhere. You can hold that thought softly as a kind of unintended calm. That vast industrial capacity, once used mainly for export goods, also helped spread tools that harvest sunlight and wind, turning bright sky into quiet power. In many cities, efforts to reduce smog and improve air quality became more visible over the years, with cleaner fuels, stricter controls on vehicles and industry, and broader monitoring. And while progress varied by region, the long arc included both damage and repair. There is a gentle lesson in that growth is not only about building new things, but about learning what must be protected, what must be cleaned, and what must be made safer for the next decade. Tonight, imagine a skyline after rain, the air clearer, lights reflected in wet streets, and beyond the city, wind turbines turning slowly, not dramatic, just steady, like the slow turning of a thought toward something kinder. And as that imagined wind keeps turning, let your own breathing remain simple, in and out, in and out, while the great machine of the grid continues its quiet work without asking anything of you. With energy flowing and transport smoothing distance, cities grew upward, and housing became one of the most tangible symbols of change. Across decades, millions of apartments were built, sometimes entire districts at once, with repeating windows and balconies that looked identical from afar, yet inside held lives that were anything but identical, each household arranging their own quiet routines. For many families, a new apartment meant modern plumbing, reliable electricity, safer construction, and proximity to work and schools. And it also meant a different kind of time. Less time spent traveling long distances, more time spent within the city's woven services. Urbanization on this scale is one of the largest shifts in where people live in modern history, and it was supported by migrant labor that built the towers, laid the pipes, mixed the concrete, and then often moved again, following the next site, the next paycheck, the next chance. China's household registration system, which ties many social benefits to a person's registered hometown, shaped how migration felt, because people could work for years in a city while still navigating access to schooling, healthcare, and housing in complex ways. You don't need to hold the complexity tonight, only the human feeling of it, the determination of starting over, and the quiet exhaustion of carrying your life in bags, moving from village to dormitory, from dormitory to rented room, from rented room to something more stable. Over time, property also became a financial object, a place to store value in a rapidly changing economy. And construction itself became a powerful engine for growth, pulling in steel, cement, glass, lending, and local government revenue. When something becomes both shelter and investment, it can become delicate because rising prices comfort some households and strain others. And when too many homes are built too quickly, empty apartments and stressed developers can appear, inviting policy tightening and careful adjustment. In recent years, China has worked through this balancing act, trying to reduce excess risk while maintaining stability, because a housing market is not only a market, it is a set of expectations that lives inside millions of families. Tonight, imagine a city at midnight, a few windows lit, most dark, elevators resting, streets quiet, and somewhere high above, curtains moving slightly in air-conditioned breath, as if the whole skyline is learning to be still. Let that stillness come closer now, not as a city, but as your own room, your own bed, your own steady sense of safety, while the larger story continues, patient and far away. As the physical city became familiar, another kind of city rose inside the phone, quiet, bright, and always nearby. In the 2010s and into the 2020s, China's digital economy expanded rapidly, with e-commerce, delivery networks, ride-hailing, and mobile payments becoming ordinary parts of daily life in many places, so that a small square code on a screen could replace cash, tickets, and even some paperwork. If you have ever watched someone pay with a quick scan, you know the strange calm of it, the way an action that once required counting coins becomes a single gentle gesture, almost like turning a page. Behind that simplicity was more infrastructure, not roads and bridges, but fiber optic cables, data centers, cloud services, and the patient work of engineers making systems reliable enough to disappear into routine. The rise also included a slow shift up the value chain from assembling goods designed elsewhere to designing more at home, investing in research, education, and higher value manufacturing. Because as wages rise and markets mature, efficiency must come from knowledge as much as from scale. You can imagine this as a change in texture, from the roughness of raw materials to the finer grain of precision parts, software, and services, from heavy smoke to cleaner processes, from volume alone to coordination and quality. For households, the change often felt like convenience. Groceries arriving at the door, a doctor's appointment booked through an app, a message sent instantly to family far away. And these small conveniences accumulate into time, and time becomes a new kind of wealth. At the same time, speed can be tiring, and even the most efficient system can make life feel crowded with options. So there was a growing desire for stability, for rules that protect consumers, for guardrails that keep a fast society from slipping. China's modern story, like any modern story, is not one note, but many: growth and correction, innovation and regulation, openness and caution, and through it all, the steady daily work of ordinary people adapting to new tools. Tonight, you can let the tools fade into the background and keep only the image of light, a screen dimmed low, a city outside the window, and a mind that does not need to keep up with anything at all. The world has moved quickly in these decades, yet sleep reminds us that the deepest restoration is slow, and that even the largest systems eventually quiet down, one blinking light at a time. So, as you listen, imagine a delivery scooter parked and silent, a router light pulsing softly, and a street lamp casting a steady pool of glow, and let the pace slow until it feels almost timeless. By now, the story has traveled far from the first cautious openings along the coast, and the pace begins to feel different. In the earlier decades, growth often came from building and exporting, from adding factories, ports, highways, and apartment blocks, and sending out a steady stream of goods to the wider world. But as the country became larger and wealthier, the center of gravity slowly shifted inward toward what happens at home, toward consumption, services, and the daily life of cities that had grown into their own enormous ecosystems. You can picture a morning in a modern Chinese city, not dramatic, just busy in a gentle, ordinary way, with commuters moving through metro stations, breakfast stalls steaming, and office lights turning on like rows of quiet lanterns. Services expanded because people needed more than production alone can provide: healthcare, education, finance, logistics, entertainment, hospitality, and all the small professions that smooth the edges of modern life. A growing middle class meant more choices: restaurants, travel, better appliances, smarter phones, and with choice comes the need for systems that can handle complexity without breaking. At night, it's soothing to think of an economy learning to become less of a sprint and more of a steady walk, a long rhythm that can be repeated without exhaustion. Policies began to speak more often about rebalancing, about relying less on investment-heavy building booms and more on household demand, on innovation, and on services that can keep people comfortable as wages rise. This shift is never clean because older engines keep running while new ones start to hum, and the overlap can feel messy in daylight. Yet from a distance, it looks like a gradual change in texture. Imagine the loud clatter of a construction site fading slightly, replaced by the softer sounds of a service city, the hush of a clinic waiting room, the calm voice of a teacher, the quiet beep of a train gate, the murmured conversation in a small cafe. Even the idea of work changes in this phase, from making objects to coordinating flows, from lifting and welding to scheduling, designing, analyzing, and caring. And while exports remained important, the goal became to build an economy that could keep its balance even when the outside world became uncertain, like a ship that learns to steady itself in changing weather. Tonight, you don't need to follow the details or the debate, only the gentle fact that large systems mature, and that maturity often looks like steadiness. So let the city slow in your imagination, lights turning warmer, streets quieting, and the whole vast machine settling into a smoother hum, while you settle too. As the service city took shape, another city rose alongside it, made of screens and signals, soft light, and invisible connection. In the 2010s, smartphones spread widely, and daily routines began to fold inward into apps that could call a ride, pay a bill, book a train, or order dinner without a single coin changing hands. Mobile payments became especially common, turning a quick scan into a quiet act of trust, and e-commerce grew into a vast marketplace that could reach deep into smaller towns as delivery networks expanded. You can picture online storefronts like long night streets, each window showing a different object, each click a small footstep, and behind the scenes, a warehouse preparing the item as if answering a polite knock at the door. You can imagine the gentle choreography behind it. Warehouses lit at dawn, packages moving along conveyors, route maps updating, scooters waiting at the curb, and then the small sound of a parcel placed at a door. Digital convenience, at its best, does not shout, it smooths, making ordinary tasks require fewer steps, fewer queues, fewer uncertainties, and in a busy society, those saved minutes become a new kind of breathing room. Behind the convenience was new infrastructure, fiber cables, data centers, and cloud services, physical rooms of humming machines that keep the digital world steady through heat, storms, and heavy demand. At night, data centers feel almost like modern lighthouses, not guiding ships, but guiding information. Their blinking lights faint and regular, their air cool and controlled. This same period also brought a push toward higher value work, toward design, engineering, and research. Because as wages rise, growth depends more on productivity and knowledge than on sheer labor alone. Universities expanded, technical training improved, and companies invested more in research and development, moving gradually from assembling goods designed elsewhere to creating more of their own components, software, and brands. None of this happened in a straight line, and not all sectors moved at the same pace, yet the direction was clear enough to feel. More complexity, more capability, more attention to innovation. With that capability came new questions about security, privacy, and regulation. The quiet realization that digital life needs guardrails if it is to remain comfortable rather than exhausting. Tonight, you can let those questions drift past without effort and keep only the soft image of a city where a phone screen dims, a delivery route ends, and the day's last message is sent. The system continues to hum, but you do not have to, because your own night is simpler than any network. One breath, then another, then the slow release into rest. While new convenience spread through cities, the older foundations of growth, steel, cement, power, left their marks on the air and water, and the country began a long, careful turn toward repair. For many years, coal provided much of China's electricity because it was available at scale and could support rapid industrialization, yet the smoke and fine particles that came with it made air pollution a visible and felt problem in many urban areas. At night, you can imagine the earlier decades as a darker kind of haze, streetlights haloed, distant buildings softened, and then gradually the clearer nights that followed as controls tightened and cleaner energy grew. Policies expanded to reduce emissions from industry, upgrade heating, improve fuel standards, and monitor air quality more closely. And while outcomes varied by city and season, the broader effort became a recognizable part of modern life. Cities also invested in cleaner transport, expanding metro systems, improving buses, and, in many places, electrifying fleets so that the street sound softened from engine roar to a steadier, quieter glide. China invested heavily in renewable energy, building vast wind farms across open plains and large solar installations in sunnier regions, while also expanding hydro and, in some places, nuclear generation, all aimed at diversifying the grid. In global terms, the scale of these additions was striking, not only because it changed the country's own energy mix, but because large-scale manufacturing of solar panels and related equipment helped drive down costs worldwide. Yet an energy transition is not a switch. It is overlap, with coal plants still running while wind and solar rise beside them, and with the grid learning how to carry power over long distances and balance variable supply. You can picture that balancing like a quiet conductor, directing flows through wires and substations, keeping light steady as the sources shift, making complexity feel simple from the viewpoint of an apartment lamp. Environmental progress also included the slow work of cleaning rivers, managing waste, and improving urban green space. And these changes, when they arrive, feel less like achievement and more like relief. Relief is a good word for night because sleep itself is a kind of environmental restoration, the body reducing inflammation, settling the nervous system, clearing the day's residue from the mind. So tonight, let the imagined skyline breathe more easily, with clearer edges, softer light, and a calmer sense of space between buildings. Let the wind turbines turn far away like slow white clocks. Let solar panels rest under moonlight, and let the whole idea of repair feel patient, steady, and possible as you drift further toward rest. As the air and the grid began to change, another structure stood quietly in the background of daily life, the apartment itself and the vast system built around it. Housing in China is more than shelter because for many families it became the main store of savings, a way to hold value in something tangible and a sign that a household had found stable ground in a fast-moving world. Cities built upward for years, sometimes with breathtaking speed, and construction fed a wide supply chain of steel, cement, glass, appliances, furniture, and the labor that turns blueprints into rooms. Local governments often relied on land sales and development to fund services and infrastructure, so the property cycle was not only a private matter, but a public one too, tied to budgets, transit lines, and urban expansion. At the same time, millions of migrants lived as renters for long stretches, building the city by day and returning to small rooms by night, saving, hoping that stability might eventually have an address of its own. At night, you can imagine this as a set of nested boxes, a family's home inside a building, the building inside a district, the district inside a city plan, and the city plan inside a financial system that wants everything to remain steady. When property prices rise too fast, households feel stretched. And when developers build too much, empty apartments can appear like unlit windows, quiet reminders that supply and demand can drift out of alignment. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, the property sector faced growing stress in some areas, with tighter credit, stalled projects, and a search for new balance. And these strains mattered because so many industries and household expectations were connected to housing. Responses included efforts to limit speculative excess, expand rental options, and encourage the completion of unfinished projects, all aimed at keeping the basic promise of housing intact. You don't need to hold the policy details tonight, only the idea that a system built for expansion must eventually learn how to slow without collapsing, how to finish what has started, how to protect buyers, and how to keep cities livable. In calmer language, it is the difference between building more and taking care of what is already built. The difference between pouring new concrete and maintaining elevators, plumbing, insulation, and trust. Imagine a residential tower at midnight, corridors quiet, only a few soft lights on, the building settling the way a ship settles after a long day at sea. Far below, street sweepers move slowly, and somewhere a security guard walks a steady route, not to chase danger, but to keep the night predictable. And as the housing story moves through its adjustments, let your own sense of shelter become stronger, because tonight your only task is to rest inside your own walls, safe and unhurried. As the story nears the present, time itself becomes one of the main characters, steady and impossible to negotiate with. China's population has been aging, and that changes the feel of the future, because fewer new workers enter the labor force, while more people need health care, support, and a gentler pace of life. An aging society asks different questions than a young one. It asks how to fund pensions, how to staff hospitals, how to design cities that are easy to navigate, and how to keep growth steady when sheer numbers are no longer rising as before. At night, those questions can sound heavy, so we'll hold them lightly, like stones resting at the bottom of a clear pond, present but not disturbing the surface. In practical terms, the response often involves productivity, doing more with fewer hands through better training, better technology, and better coordination. And you can see it in factories that use more automation and in offices that replace paper with digital workflow. You can picture a worker supervising a line of machines, not racing, just watching, adjusting, ensuring the process stays smooth, like a gardener tending a system that now knows how to grow. There is also a social dimension, because smaller families mean fewer caregivers per elder, and so communities, employers, and public services all share more of the responsibility for care. In many places, this has meant expanding clinics, improving insurance coverage, and building digital systems that help schedule appointments and manage records, so the practical work of care becomes more coordinated and less chaotic. At the same time, the economy has been recalibrating, seeking stability after years of rapid change and shifting attention toward domestic demand, advanced manufacturing, and services that support daily well-being. Innovation has remained a quiet priority, visible in research labs, in stronger engineering capacity, and in industries that require finer precision, from batteries and electric transport to modern electronics and clean energy equipment. Recalibration is a soothing word, because it implies that the system is still moving, only more carefully, listening for strain, tightening bolts, easing pressure, learning how to last. From the outside, you may hear this described as a new phase, slower and more complex. But inside, it often feels like ordinary life continuing. Children going to school, trains arriving on time, clinics opening in the morning, lights turning on at dusk. Tonight, let the present be simple. Let the decades behind us become a long shoreline shaped by many small waves, and let the future remain unforced, not something to predict, only something to meet with steadiness. The world keeps adjusting quietly, and you are allowed to do the same, lowering the day, loosening the mind, and letting sleep take over, one calm breath at a time. In the newest chapters of this story, the horizon widens again, not as a sudden leap, but as a steady reaching outward. As China grew, it began not only to receive investment and technology, but also to send capital, companies, and engineers abroad, financing and building projects that ranged from ports and industrial parks to power plants, pipelines, and rail lines. Some of this outward building was gathered under broad initiatives meant to improve connectivity across regions, including the Belt and Road Framework announced in the 2010s. And some of it was simply the natural behavior of large firms looking for markets, resources, and partnerships beyond their borders. At night, it can be soothing to imagine this outward movement as a set of gentle threads, ships crossing dark water, trains rolling through distant valleys, and contracts being signed in quiet rooms where people speak in careful tones. Connectivity is built from repeated practical steps, surveying land, negotiating terms, pouring foundations, stringing cables, training operators, and then keeping everything maintained long after the ribbon is cut. A port is not only a dock, but a choreography of cranes, warehouses, customs processes, and road links, and when those pieces align, a place that once felt far away can become part of a familiar route. These projects can bring roads where there were dirt paths, electricity where there were candles, and jobs where there was limited opportunity. And they can also bring debt burdens, environmental strain, and political tension, because big infrastructure always casts a long shadow. Tonight, you do not need to weigh the arguments, only to notice the shape of it, that rising capacity often seeks new outlets, and that a country once described mainly as a manufacturing hub became, in some places, a builder and financier of systems elsewhere. Global trade itself began to feel less like a one-way flow and more like a loop, with goods, capital, and ideas circulating in many directions, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with friction. And in the background, commodity markets responded to China's needs and choices, because when a large economy buys steel inputs, energy, food and raw materials, prices and supply chains shift around it, like water bending around a stone. Let that stone be quiet tonight, heavy but still, resting at the bottom of a clear pond while the surface remains calm. The world is connected by many hidden lines, and you do not have to follow them, because for you, connection can mean something smaller and kinder. The steady link between breath and rest, between darkness and sleep. As the outward thread stretched, another kind of change continued inside the country, quieter than ports and rail, but just as decisive. When wages rise and basic infrastructure is in place, growth depends more on productivity and knowledge, and so investment shifted toward research, higher value manufacturing, and industries that require precision. You can picture this as a change in texture, from heavy smoke and loud stamping machines toward cleaner rooms, finer tools, and processes measured in tiny tolerances and careful timing. China expanded its capacity in advanced manufacturing, producing not only consumer electronics, but also components, industrial machinery, and increasingly the technologies needed for electrification, including batteries, power electronics, and electric vehicles. In many cities, clusters formed around universities, labs, and supply chains where engineers moved between firms, where prototypes were tested, improved, and produced at scale, and where learning traveled quickly through experience. Some of these clusters grew in coastal regions and major metros, in places already shaped by export industry, where suppliers sat close together, sharing parts, workers, and know-how, like neighbors sharing tools. At night, learning is a gentle thing. It does not demand applause. It accumulates through repetition, through small corrections, through the quiet discipline of trying again. Innovation also depends on standards, on testing, on safety rules, on quality control. The unromantic work that turns an invention into something reliable enough to be forgotten. And reliability has a calming power. A device that works every day becomes part of life's background, like running water or a light switch. And in that background, the mind can rest. This period also saw the spread of cleaner transport in many places, with metros expanding, rail networks improving, and electric buses and cars becoming more common, changing the soundscape of streets from engine roar to a softer glide. Over the years, research spending grew, patent filings multiplied, and more students moved from classroom theory to practical engineering, building a quieter bridge between ideas and factories. Yet every advance brings new trade-offs: demand for minerals, for energy, for recycling systems, and for rules that keep growth from becoming careless. Tonight, you can hold the whole picture gently as a workshop lit late, a technician adjusting a machine, a test running quietly, numbers appearing on a screen, and then the simple satisfaction of steady results. And as that workshop hum fades into distance, let your own thoughts become less like a project and more like a tide, rising and falling without effort. In the 2020s, the story is often described as a recalibration, a period when the emphasis turns from sheer expansion toward security, stability, and long-term resilience. Large systems learn to protect themselves, not with drama, but with policy, with regulation, with redundancy, and with careful attention to what might fail under stress. A global pandemic at the start of the decade reminded many countries, including China, how easily supply chains can be disrupted, and how quickly uncertainty can spread from hospitals to factories to ports. Trade frictions and technology restrictions in parts of the world added another layer of caution, encouraging planners and firms to ask what must be produced locally and what can safely rely on distant partners. There was also a growing focus on climate and energy security because resilience includes the ability to power cities cleanly and reliably, even as weather and demand become less predictable. China focused more on strengthening domestic capacity in certain strategic areas, investing in research, supporting key industries, and encouraging supply chains that can function even when global flows are interrupted. At the same time, rules tightened in parts of the economy, especially where rapid growth had outpaced oversight, and this reflected a broader truth. When complexity rises, governance must become more deliberate. You might imagine a river that has widened after heavy rain, and then the slow work of building stronger banks, shaping channels, placing stones where erosion is likely, not to stop the water, but to guide it safely. The digital world also became more regulated with greater attention to data, platforms, and financial risk because in modern economies, information can move faster than goods, and its effects can be just as real. None of these shifts are simple, and none are perfectly smooth. But they show a country trying to manage the tension between openness and control, between innovation and stability, between growth and the need to rest. Rest is not only personal. Societies, too, seek rest from volatility, from bubbles, from shocks that exhaust households and businesses alike. You can picture households wanting the ordinary comforts of predictability, a job that endures, a home that feels secure, schools that function, clinics that are reachable, and streets that feel safe at night. These are quiet ambitions, and they are the ambitions that matter most when the excitement of rapid change begins to fade. Tonight, let stability be the mood that surrounds you, not as a promise that nothing will change, but as a reassurance that change can be managed, absorbed, and softened. The world does not need to be mastered. It only needs to keep breathing, and so do you, slowly and evenly, while the larger story settles into a calmer rhythm. Now, as we near the end of this long journey, it helps to imagine what this rise feels like inside a single lifetime. Someone born in the late 1970s might remember villages with dim lights, long trips by bus, streets without many cars, and a sense that distance was heavy and slow to cross. That same person might later watch highways appear, then subways, then high-speed rail, and feel the country compress around them as if time itself had folded a little, bringing cities closer, bringing opportunities within reach. They might remember the first television in a neighborhood, then the first computer, then the first smartphone, and the strange way each new tool quietly changes the shape of conversation, shopping, work, and even attention. They might also remember the spring festival journeys, stations crowded with suitcases and gifts, the patient waiting, the long rides home, and then years later, the same journey taking fewer hours on faster trains. They might send money home from the city. Then later, send voice notes instead, the message arriving instantly, carrying affection in a small, glowing packet of sound. And when they returned to an old street, they might notice new pavement, new storefronts, new schools, and older neighbors sitting in the same places, proving that change and continuity can share the same corner. They might move from countryside to city, from dormitory to rented room, from rented room to an apartment, and feel the steady tension between hope and exhaustion, between pride and worry, between progress and the cost of keeping up. China's rise is often told with numbers: GDP, export volumes, infrastructure mileage. But inside a life, it is told with smaller measures: a parent's wage rising, a child entering university, a clinic opening nearby, an older relative living longer. It is also told with the weight of change, the pressure of competition, the strain of crowded schools, the fatigue of long commutes, the uncertainty of property cycles, and the longing for a pace that is easier to inhabit. At night, you can hold both truths at once. That transformation can lift and it can tire, that it can widen options and also create new expectations that are difficult to meet. And perhaps this is why bedtime stories about nations work so well, because they return the vast to the intimate, reminding you that every system is made of people and every era is lived one day at a time. Tonight, let the decades become like a long film, dissolving into softer frames, faces blurred kindly by distance, arguments quieted, accomplishments and mistakes held without sharpness. You are not responsible for the whole arc of history. You are only responsible for your own rest here, now, in this room, as the world continues its slow turning beyond the window. And so the story comes to its quiet closing, not with a verdict, but with a gentle letting go. China's rise over the last several decades can be seen as an unfolding of reforms, trade, investment, urbanization, infrastructure, technology, and the patient work of institutions trying to steer a system too large to move quickly without shaking. It began with cautious experiments after 1978, with rural reforms and coastal zones where new rules were tested, and it accelerated through export growth, mass urban migration, and the steady construction of ports, power, and transport. In 2001, joining the global trade system brought more predictability, and the country's factories, ports, and suppliers became deeply woven into everyday life around the world, through objects that arrived quietly in kitchens and living rooms. Then came the great stitching of distance, highways and high-speed rail, turning a continent into a set of shorter journeys, and digital tools smoothing daily life with payments, delivery, and coordination that often felt almost effortless. The costs and corrections arrived too: air and water strained by industry, property booms that required adjustment, and the slow demographic shift toward an older society, asking for more care and more balance. In the 2020s, the tone became steadier, with more emphasis on resilience, on stability, on the long work of making systems durable rather than simply larger. It can also be seen, more simply, as a landscape of ordinary evenings, families eating dinner in small kitchens, students studying under desk lamps, workers returning home on crowded trains, and city lights reflecting in puddles after rain. Somewhere a port crane pauses, a shift ends, a factory floor dims, and a high-speed train glides into a station and exhales its passengers into the night. Somewhere else, wind turns slowly on a distant ridge, solar panels rest under moonlight, and a river carries reflections past new bridges that will feel ancient to the next generation. The world continues to adjust, to balance, to correct, to endure. And even when the headlines feel sharp, the deeper rhythm is often slower than it seems. Tonight, you can trust slow rhythms. You can trust the way breathing settles the body, the way darkness lowers the mind's volume, the way stillness makes space for sleep. Let the map fade now, coastlines and rail lines dissolving into a simple sense of distance. Let the decades soften into something like ocean sound, present but not demanding, vast but gentle. And if any thought tries to pull you back into analysis, imagine placing it on a small paper boat and setting it on a calm river, watching it drift away until it disappears. The room is quiet, the day is done, and you have nothing left to carry. Good night.